Most of us don't sit on the floor very often these days, so sitting on your yoga mat can be one of the most challenging parts of your practice. I'm Paula from Happy Yoga Wales, and today we're going to take a look at how you can make sitting on your mat a little bit more comfortable. So I'm sitting in a pose called saddle or hero pose, and we can make this more comfortable in lots of different ways. So I'll just turn to the side so you can see here. So my shoulders are stacked over my hips, and then my knee joints are closed really quite tightly here, so they're closed as far as they'll go. This isn't a nice position for lots of us. It's quite unusual for us to be in this position. Normally our legs are open if we're sitting in a chair or if we're walking. So when they're closed like this, it can cause a bit of knee pain. It can be a bit too extreme. So the first thing we can do is raise the hips. So we can do this with something like a block. And if you haven't got any of this proper yoga equipment, you can get a cushion, a pillow, anything you've got at home. A few big books will do just the trick too. So I'm going to pop that directly underneath my hips and sit down here. So a few things to note here. We want to make sure that the lower leg is in line with the thigh. So this, when your ankles come out, we see children sit like this quite often. And this is called a W pose. So when the heels or the feet are further out than the knees. This is not good for the knees. So bring those feet in and try and keep the lower leg in line with the upper leg. Next thing we want to do is check the position of the pelvis. So if we're really tucked under like this, the pelvis is tilting backwards, and again this isn't great for our joints, and this time it's the low back that's going to suffer here. So we want to tilt the pelvis forward. So imagine you've got a little duck's tail and you're sticking it out so that we find a little bit of a curve in the low back. And we don't want to overdo it, so we don't want to do too much like this. Just bring it to a natural curve. And then finally, like I said earlier, keeping your shoulders stacked directly above the hips. So this still might be a little bit too much, so you could raise your hips even higher. The other thing you can do is pop something behind the knees here. And these little squishy blocks are pretty good for that. So I'm improvising. You can use, again, pillows or blankets. You can roll a thin blanket and just slide in that behind the knee joint. And that feels quite nice because it's a really squishy foam. So then, because I've done that, I maybe need to raise the hips a little bit higher. That's a little bit narrow, but you get the idea. So you could adjust this pose however you want to. And this is really useful for if you're doing meditation at the start of your practice or at the end. Quite often we just sit in a meditation pose for 5 minutes, maybe even longer. So our next pose is a cross-legged pose. And again, there's lots of different ways to do this. We can sit on the floor. For a lot of us, our pelvis will stop us from doing this comfortably. And that's because the femur, so the thigh bone, goes into the hip socket in different ways for all of us. So everybody is different. Some people have lots of movement. So imagine this is my thigh bone, this is my hip socket. So some people have lots of movement and they can do all sorts of things with their legs and their hips. Some people just don't have that mobility. So this is because the bone will hit the bone. It's never going to change. So however much stretching you do, you're never going to get an increase in that mobility if that is the case for you. So we just got to work with what we've got. So it's not that one is better than the other, it just is what it is. So you might find that you're sitting with your knees up or that you're rounded here. So we want to correct both of those things and make it more comfortable and better for your posture overall. So this skinny block, again, I'm going to slide this one underneath my hips and then just let the pelvis come forward, just like we did in our saddle pose. And then you can see I just need to readjust my feet, bringing them closer to my body. So if your feet are out here, you might find that hurts the knees a little bit. So bringing them in as close as is comfortable for you. And again, just finding that place where there's no pain, obviously. Stacking the shoulders above the hips. You could also pop something underneath the thighs here. Again, if you're going to be here a little while, so just a little bit of support like that. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. then that can just take a little bit of pressure off the knees and also off the hip joints if you're there for some time. The other thing we can do with this little bolster that I didn't mention before is that we can straddle it, and a lot of people in my classes like to sit like this. So you can literally straddle your bolster. And again, being mindful that the heels and the feet are in line with the knees, so there's a tendency for the feet to go out wider, but we want them tucked in here so everything's in this nice straight line. So they're my favourite ways to sit on the floor using props. One final thing for you to be mindful of is if you're sitting cross-legged, have a little look down and you'll probably notice that every time you sit down you'll have one leg in front of the other, the same leg. So see if you can switch it and have the uncomfortable leg in front every now and then and just see how that feels. And over time that'll start to balance out through the whole of the low body, through the hips and even through the spine actually. So it's worth going with the uncomfortable version of cross-legged pose every now and then too. So I hope you enjoyed this and found it useful. This is part of the absolute beginner yoga course that I've got on happyyoga.wales. So if you're not already there watching this, then head over and have a look. And if you're on YouTube, then let me know whether you found it useful, and then let me know which leg you tend to have in front. For me, it's always the right leg when I sit cross-legged. So this is my comfortable pose. So let me know in the comments, which way do you sit? Right leg, left leg, and I'll see you again next time on the mat.